Hi, it's Len Edgerly with the Kindle Chronicles on February 28th, 2020. I'm coming to you from downtown Denver, but later today we will be flying back to Boston. We've decided to head back to Boston as the approach of the COVID-19 coronavirus makes, I think travel in the coming weeks is going to be uncertain at best, and I just wanted to make sure that in the game of musical chairs that might ensue, that when the music stops, we'll be able to be in Boston, where I think we can be helpful and useful to all my family back there. And it may be, I hope I'm being overcautious, and I really appreciate Darlene being flexible enough to drop everything and head out there. We decided to do this yesterday, and that's where we'll be as of tonight, and then probably for the rest of the year. I've also decided not to go to South by Southwest. I got some advice from Jerry Riddle that with 300,000 people descending on Austin, the likelihood that the virus will also be attending is certainly is probably above zero. And I think also by that time, 2 weeks from now, there'll be questions about travel as well. Not to panic, but it looks like if the way an outbreak like this is handled, there may well be times when we just aren't able to leave our homes. There'll be people working at home. There'll be children out of school, as is the case in Japan until April. And so there'll be disruptions as this natural event, a virus that doesn't honor any national boundaries, makes its way to our shores. It's worth reading up on, and I'm sure all of you are keeping on top of the news and understanding it for your own purposes. But in our case, it did result in a change in travel. For this episode, I have an interview with Bradley Metrock, who is the executive director of Digital Book World, and he's taken a very strong stand against one of the big five publishers, Macmillan, over a change they made in how they make ebooks available to public libraries. And Bradley, I love Bradley. He's a feisty guy, and he's gotten into it with Amazon in the past. And I remember thinking, this guy stands up for himself, and when he believes something, he's a man of action, and he goes right out there. And I think you'll hear that in this conversation that we had about Macmillan's policy toward the public libraries. And I'm going to start with a consideration of some comments that Jay Carney, who is the Senior Vice President for Public Relations and Public Policy for Amazon, made earlier this month in reaction to some of the criticism of Amazon that you hear very frequently on the Democratic presidential campaign trail. So Jay Carney, who is in charge of public relations and public policy for Amazon, he's senior vice president, I believe he reports directly to Jeff Bezos, wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times that was published on February 10th. And the title of the piece was kind of relevant given the ascendancy of Bernie Sanders in the Democratic primary, as I speak to you on Friday, before the South Carolina caucus, primary and Super Tuesday. The headline was "Why Bernie Sanders Praised Amazon." And it's a story in the Times of Bernie Sanders calling Jay Carney up, and Jay instantly recognized the voice. And he said, "Listen, this is Bernie talking. I won't do an imitation. I just want to congratulate Amazon for raising your minimum wage to $15 an hour. That's good for your workers. It's the right thing to do. Please thank Jeff Bezos for me." Well, that was another time. That was back in November of 2018, and Jay points out that the honeymoon didn't last long, that now Sanders and Warren and others regularly attack the company on the campaign trail. But for whatever reasons, Carney wrote this op-ed for the New York Times more recently, earlier this month, and it was picked up for an interview at CNBC. And I'll play you a few excerpts from that interview and then talk about it. The question of the first introduction to this interview was a question of why did Jay Carney choose this point to write an article about the $15 minimum wage? And here's what he had to say.
We welcome the attention, we welcome the scrutiny, but we also want to make sure that those who are paying attention to that part of the debate understand what Amazon really is and what we're about. One of the things I wrote in that column is that phrases like big tech and the tech industry, they obscure more than they enlighten. I mean, you guys know at CNBC how different we are as a company from some of our quote-unquote big tech peers. I mean, our primary business is to store, pick, pack, and deliver billions of physical goods. That requires enormous infrastructure and an enormous amount of employment. That's very different from trading in bits of data. We don't offer a service free of charge in exchange for your data that we then monetize. That's very different from some other business models.
There are a couple of things I noticed there. One is that Jay Carney, being a consummate public spokesman, he served for several years as President Obama's press secretary, took time out to praise his interlocutors and their knowledge of business. He did it one other time in this brief interview, and that's a good thing. I mean, it's honest. He was talking to people that understand business more than some of the people he talks to, but good to see how a pro handles these things. The other thing that I find notable, given some of the other reading that I've been doing and following how big tech is being talked about in the campaign, there's an effort here to distinguish Amazon from other unnamed big tech companies. He's clearly talking about Facebook, I think Google, maybe not so much Apple, but to emphasize, I think fairly, that yes, technology underlies everything that Amazon does, but it also moves billions of boxes around the world. And I've seen the fulfillment center in Fall River, Mass, and it's a great big warehouse where people are doing real jobs with boxes and machines and things like that. So I think that the strategy here is, particularly as a possible change in administration approaches in this election, and even just changing times no matter which party is in power, that big tech, if it's a blanket category, which I think it is for some people, probably Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren among them, that Amazon could get swept up into changes that might not be good for society, never mind good for Amazon, that didn't take into account distinctions about what these different companies do. And I think that Facebook certainly, and Google, issues of privacy and the use of data and the use of disinformation that can affect political campaigns. These are different kinds of issues than whether what Amazon learns from Alexa is in some way pernicious. And I think that he's also making the point, and I've heard other Amazon executives, that scrutiny to a company as big as Amazon is certainly appropriate. And so questions about how Amazon is using data are appropriate, and there's reasons to expect that there will be more regulation of these companies in the future. Hopefully, there'll be distinctions drawn by the professionals that are called to do it that take into account that they're not all identical kinds of tech companies. And so that's I think that's a fair point to make, and you can sort of see there's a bit of a preemptive bit of work that Carney is doing here, as Amazon gets mentioned very frequently in the political season during the campaign. The next excerpt from the CNBC conversation focuses on the $15 minimum wage that Amazon introduced and announced, put into effect in November of 2018. And that was, of course, the topic of the New York Times op-ed piece.
The focus of that piece was, that moment when Bernie Sanders, a senator from Vermont, a champion of workers' rights, called me to congratulate Amazon on raising our minimum wage to $15 an hour. And that puts us well ahead of our competitors in the retail industry, coupled with enormously positive health care and maternity leave benefits that nobody else among our competitors can match, as well as a huge investment in upskilling.
All right, so then why not just pay the wage and go about your business? Why try to convince others to do so? Because, Jay, the response is, Amazon's big enough, they can afford it, and they want to crush rivals who perhaps can afford it less.
Well, I think that some of the rivals we're talking about are awfully big. In fact, much bigger than we are. It's often misunderstood that Amazon's not even the biggest retailer in the United States. Walmart is by almost 2.5 times the size of Amazon. And we believe that $15 an hour, as a lot of progressives believe, is the minimum that anybody in the United States should be paid for an hour of labor. You know that doesn't buy very much. By setting our minimum, as we did in November of 2018 at $15 an hour, we drove wage increases not just within Amazon, but across the country. Everywhere where we invest and we offer that minimum, and in many regions of the country, the minimum is above 15 for us. That helps workers around the region, and it helps drive activity in the economy that, again, produces more growth.
It makes me smile to think of how much Jay Carney must savor the memory of that phone call from Bernie Sanders thanking Amazon for raising the minimum wage, and please thank Jeff Bezos, because if you've heard Bernie and some of the others ever since then, he's not likely to get a phone call like that anytime soon. The question that was asked as to, well, okay, raise the $15, why kind of brag about it? That I think that gave Carney a good platform. And the other thing I noticed as kind of a former corporate spokesman myself is Carney is peerless in responding to questions. I guess that's the kind of skill you learn by sitting in the hot seat in the press room at the White House for 3 years. But that gave him a chance to say, look, we're doing this because it makes sense, and we're in kind of a evangelizing mode, and then a beautiful setup to say, oh, what about all the poor small companies that can't afford $15 an hour? Well, yeah, probably the biggest one is Walmart, which is almost 2.5 times the size. So good responses on that. The final excerpt I want to play you shows that when you come into an interview on television for something you wrote, you're not going to just have a chance to talk about what you wrote. You're fair game for anything that comes up. And in this case, the other CNBC reporter brought up something which had apparently just been breaking in the news at the time they spoke. And it has to do with safety in the fulfillment centers. I was interested in Carney's response to this. There was some information that I hadn't known before, and I think he did a pretty good job of setting it into context, and that is something that does get brought up from time to time about as a negative to Amazon, that we have all this fabulous service and these things show up magically, but what about the workers? What about the situations in the fulfillment centers? So it's an important question, and I'm glad it came up in this interview.
Jay, I get the case for $15 minimum wage and why you wrote the op-ed around that, but it also came on the heels of this letter from 13 members of the U.S. Senate who weren't talking about minimum wage, who were talking about safety record and looking for a response from Amazon. That wasn't exactly addressed in the op-ed. How would you address that now?
Well, the op-ed was written before the letter, but look, one of the things I say in the op-ed is, we're a big institution, we're a large company. Like all big institutions, we should be scrutinized in our job. I run both public relations and public policy, which means our conversations with governments is to make sure we pass that scrutiny with flying colors. So we'll engage, as we have, with members of Congress on this issue. The facts, as anybody who studies injury reports understands, is that across the country, injuries are woefully underreported. That was true at Amazon a number of years ago, and then we changed the way we report injuries. That spiked the numbers for us. We report well above what's required by OSHA, but we did it because we wanted the data. We wanted to know exactly what was happening so we could invest accordingly to improve the working conditions for our workers. And we're putting in another $300 million this year on safety projects to do just that. And look, I would say we welcome the letter. 13 United States senators, incredibly important people. They all know that our fulfillment centers, our warehouses, are open to public tours. We've invited every member of Congress to come have a look for themselves at the working conditions in our FCs. Far less than a majority of those senators have ever visited one. So we would love to have all of them come.
And that gave a nice prompt for him to try to get more members of Congress to take one of those tours. Darlene and I took one with my grandson, James, at Fall River, Massachusetts, and I would hope that people representing me in Congress would at least go to one of these places and experience what I saw. I think there's still important questions to ask about safety and other things which come up, but why wouldn't you at least go and actually see what they look like and hear the sounds and talk to the people and see how spotless they are and how the technology is really like something out of the future. So I'm glad he got a little plug in for the Fulfillment Center tours as well. Before we get to the interview, I want to share one tech tip with you. This came by way of John Aga, who sent me a link to an article February 19th by Michael Kozlowski at Good E-Reader. And this was information about an update to the software that runs Kindles. So I tried it. It is version 5.12.4, and I sideloaded it from my computer to my Kindle Oasis. A little rusty on the process, but it's pretty easy. And I'll have a link in the show notes to the updates page. So if you have a Kindle and you want to try this, you simply find the update for your device and then download it to your computer. And then you connect your Kindle to your computer so that it's showing sort of a USB connection. And at that point, you drag the .bin file. Mine was called update_Kindle_all_new_Oasis v 5.12.4.bin. Drag that onto the Kindle, and after you make sure that it's loaded, you disconnect the Kindle and then go to Settings, and then you hit the Settings 3 dots again, and you'll see something that says Update your Kindle. It takes several minutes for it to update. So I went through all this, and then I tried doing some of the things which Michael said are part of this new update. He said that we'll be able to access all font layout and reading options without leaving the book, that there are new contrast choices, 5 choices, -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. And then the one that was the most interesting to me, he said you can set the title of the book you're reading as your screen. So when you have the Kindle locked, you'll be able to see the cover of the book you're reading. I think that'd be really great. But I couldn't get it to work. I couldn't find a setting that I tried long clicking on a book to see if it might bring up something that said create the lock screen from this book cover. So I called Kindle support, and I got as you would expect, a very sharp person in just a minute or two, and he looked up all the information he could find for this latest update, and he could not find anything that had to do with setting the title of your book as the lock screen, and some of the other things, too, didn't appear in his official list of what the update was doing. Now, it's possible that with the update on my Kindle, some of these things will appear, and Michael said that some of them were going to be coming in a couple of weeks. But I think if you had read that article in the Good E-Reader and downloaded the update and looking for all these changes, you'll be disappointed. But I'll keep an eye on this for the next couple of weeks. And the other thing I'll be curious about is I have special offers. I don't mind the special offers on my Kindles, my Fire devices, but I wonder if I will really be able to have the opportunity to preempt the special offers by setting the cover of the book I'm reading on my Kindle. I think that would be smart. I would be pleased with that. And if I had to pay a little bit more to take the special offers off so that I could have that feature, I'd probably do it. And I also, it's been a while since you've heard my great-grandfather's clock here in Denver. This will be the last time for a while. 11 o'clock, that means we have 3 hours to finish the show and pack before we take the train out to DIA. What was I saying? I remember passing along to you a tech tip that if you call Amazon, you call Kindle support or just general Amazon support, and ask them to remove the special offers. I think some people have had success doing that without paying the additional $10 or whatever it is. There's a difference when you buy a Kindle. You get it cheaper if you're willing to see the special offers. But I think if you have one that has special offers and you call up and just ask them to take it off, then they will. But even so, it'd be worth it for me to pay $10 to, when I open up my Kindle Oasis and open the cover, I'm looking at the cover of the book that I'm actually reading. I think that'd be cool. Time now for the interview. Bradley Metrock is CEO of the Nashville-based Score Publishing and is also executive director of the Digital Book World Conference, which will be held September 14th and 15th in Nashville. He is also the founder of the VoiceFirst.fm podcast network and host of This Week in Voice. That's a really good podcast where he deals with all kinds of issues having to do with the rise of voice. I reached Bradley at home in Nashville on Monday of this week, February 24th, in order to learn more about a strong stand that he has taken against one of the big five publishers, Macmillan, over Macmillan's newly restrictive terms for selling new release ebooks to public libraries. I began by asking Bradley to tell us about the background to the current dispute over library ebook lending.
The American Library Association, which we consider a good friend of ours in Digital Book World's, came to Digital Book World 2019 where they announced, they used that conference specifically to announce their eBooks for All campaign against the embargo that hadn't gone into effect at that point, but was scheduled to do so on November 1. And, if they're against it, we're against it. And, just from a sheer observer point of view, our opinion, the audacity of a major publisher to embargo, even that word is disgusting, embargo books and limit availability, limit accessibility of resources to libraries. We're not having that. So it was an easy decision to make, and I would do it 1,000 out of 1,000 times.
It looked like at the last Digital Book World Conference, the ALA had a press conference that announced that they were going to have this campaign against the embargo. Did you help them set that up, or what was your role in the setting up that press conference?
It was a mutual idea, and we were all for it. Obviously, we were honored to have Mary Geekus, the director of the American Library Association at that time, the outgoing director, joined me for a fireside chat that was part of just a really robust program that we had for that show, which is why it was sold out. And, they wanted to come and kick things off, and the timing was right. And plus, they've got a good friend and partner in the Nashville Public Library.
Oh.
And so all roads sort of converged at Digital Book World, and it was great.
When you wrote about this at your site, you mentioned a grandmother that had taken you to the library, and it feels like that informed some of your passion on this development. Talk a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, it's personal to me. I grew up in an environment where, I sort of had an interesting family from the standpoint of half of my family really well off, and then half my family not so well off. And so I got exposed to a lot of different views of the world all at one time. But my grandmother, who was well off, took me to the library all the time and really showed me what a library was about, cultivated a curiosity for not just reading, but libraries in me. And I got to see sort of her reading patterns and her usage of the library and what role that played with her. And I get that this is just one data point in a whole constellation of information out there about how people are and are not using libraries, but I can tell you there's more people than just my grandmother who have ability to buy books, who just go to the library for one reason or another, and they get a bunch of books and they read some, don't read some, they take them back, and the whole thing continues. These are activated readers. These are activated super customers of the publishing industry. And I haven't even so much as heard that acknowledged by Macmillan or anybody else on their side of the fence talking about this issue. And to me, if you haven't even acknowledged that that's part of the equation, you don't even understand what the situation is, and you're just sort of experimenting and trying to feel your way through it. And if you look at John Sargent's remarks that he went down to the ALA conference and made, this is something else I took a lot of offense to. No planned remarks, no slides, no original research, no data backing up his decision. He just showed up and thought, you know what, I'm such a badass. I can field questions and make this thing go away. And like an idiot, he just made it worse. So it's gross. I do feel strongly about it. I knew that when we did what we did, that we would have some people say that it was some sort of publicity stunt. We don't need a publicity stunt. Come on. This is something we feel passionate about. And the thing about the publishing industry that we've learned is that it is a place where you get people with a lot of conviction and people willing to articulate perspectives and opinions on things. And on this, this is the way we feel, and this is the way it's going to be.
Well, and there's been a lot of support. I checked the ebooksforall.org site earlier this morning, and it's showing 250,728 signatures. And these are people that are basically supporting the ALA and you in opposing Macmillan's change.
Yeah, well, it's no surprise. So this is the other reason I wanted to act forcefully, is that librarians and people associated with libraries, they're a peaceful bunch of people. Nobody goes and works for a library because they want conflict, or they're seeking or they got an axe to grind. These are peaceful people who want to and see value in cultivating community, which is coincidentally what we do at Digital Book World. And a lot of folks who work for libraries are more they're more on the liberal side of the fence. That's their ideology, and I just wanted people to see that that's not who I am. I'm much more conservative. I would never identify Republican nor Democrat. I know we'll talk about you and what you just did, but I don't belong to any political party and never will. But I just, especially financially, have more of a conservative skew. But we're united in this. There's plenty of times for us to argue and bicker and call each other names, but this isn't one of them. This is easy. This is a total no-brainer. This is the definition of a layup. And I guarantee you, out of every 1,000 people that become newly familiar with what is going on here, you would get 990 on the side of libraries. That's just, they are a critical part of American life. And just like I said, it is a slap in the face to American life to not ignore the fact for a minute that libraries create an important revenue stream for publishers. Let's just act like that's not true. Let's act like it's all a loss. It's all a loss leader. Every interaction a publisher ever has is a loss. Let's just assume that. It's false. Let's just assume it. It's still part of American culture and just an invaluable part of American life and a portal to opportunity and all those things. And so we need to support them. And I obviously feel just as strongly about it as I do the day we announced it. as I wrote in that piece on digitalbookworld.com, this might last a few weeks or it might last 50 years. I couldn't care less. This is important, so there you go.
Well, and let's review the details of the current situation after November 1st. As I understand it, a library of any size, small library in Vermont or the Los Angeles Public Library, can only purchase one copy of a new ebook when it is released, and then they have to wait 8 weeks before they can purchase additional ones. Is that what the setup?
Yeah, I believe that's correct, yeah.
And then you've got the ones that they buy after that, they buy at the usual price, which is pretty high, like $60 is the average.
That's one thing that I actually had no clue about until I started to get more knowledgeable on this. I had no idea that libraries were paying these double, triple, quadruple rates, sort of reflecting, some of the loss that publishers may receive from engaging with them. So that just makes it even to where there's even less excuse. Yeah. It's like you can't. Wait a minute. Let me understand you. You can't sell books to a library at quadruple the rate. I'm serious.
The more you look at this, the more trouble there is.
It is, Lynn. It's a joke, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Yeah. And I don't care who it makes upset. I'm upset. It's offensive. That's a word I don't normally use. It's offensive, and it has to stop. And ultimately, it will stop. But whatever little saber we can rattle around and make noise about it, by God, we're going to do it, because it's just I feel that way about it.
You put up a tweet today that I saw that says that the Digital Book World ban on Macmillan employees has already had outcomes I would not have expected, most of them positive. And you said it's recalibrated an electrified Digital Book World. Tell me a little bit more about that, the outcomes that you didn't expect that you've seen so far since you went public with this.
Sure. I can't go into all of them, but I can certainly, at this point, but I can certainly share some. So, as you might imagine, when we announced that, and I think the subject line of the email that we sent out was like, Digital Book World bans Macmillan. I mean, it was something extremely direct. And we don't send newsletter-type emails. We send emails that have like one thing in them. And so either you read the one thing or you don't, but there's no confusion about what the email's about. This had, just the information that because of just, unbelievable gall and disrespect shown toward libraries, we're now going to ban Macmillan, everybody down the food chain at Macmillan, and everybody up the food chain at the parent company from attending Digital Book World. Now,
let me stop in there. Do you have any sense of how many people that might affect based on how many Macmillan employees were at the last conference?
Well, it definitely will keep some people from attending. I'll tell you that. So there's some revenue lost from us. They have attended and actually spoken at each of the previous two Digital Book Worlds. So it's not like we're doing something that doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. It has an impact, and and plus these publishers is such an old industry, and it's such a tight-knit industry that it became clear that hanging one of these people out to dry, boy, they didn't appreciate that.
Have you got negative reaction from some of the other Big Five publishers?
No, not from them. It's sort of like, wow, I can't believe you actually did that. Now let's talk about how to work together. That's sort of been the reaction from them. Macmillan has been like, how part of the critique from Macmillan has been, as well as from a few other people, aligned with them, has been, how can you ban the whole company for the act of the CEO? And my response is, it's easy, and I would do it again. Like it or not, you can say whatever you want. I'm sure there's phenomenal people who work at Macmillan. I know there is, because they've been at Digital Book World, and I've gotten to meet them. This is above that. when you work at a company, you're answerable in every way to the CEO, and that includes ways you never signed up for or anticipated. Their stances are yours. And you can say you don't like it all you want. It doesn't change anything. So that's been one critique that I've sort of been open-minded about. I've been a little bit sympathetic to that, but at the end of the day, that's not any different than any other company. Amazon employees are held to account because of stuff Bezos does and says. He's out there buying a gazillion homes. That reflects a certain way on the Amazon rank and file. You can complain and gnash your teeth all you want. It doesn't change anything. Or doing this HQ2 stuff where they get all these tax incentives for absolutely no reason whatsoever. That reflects poorly on everybody doing everything at the company. And that's just one example. One remark at somebody at Chick-fil-A in executive management reflects on the whole company. And you have people picketing at the Chick-fil-A in Des Moines, Iowa, because of one out-of-context comment that an executive made. This is the way the world works. Yeah, and in this case, too, it's not just a random comment from the CEO. It's a policy that they have implemented that affects people that are important in the book world. Oh, it is. And to be completely clear about it, it's perfectly obvious at this point that Macmillan is behind. Macmillan sees nothing wrong with what they're doing. So, that will just have to play out and however it plays out. But what's been interesting to see, and we lost a sponsor over it. I'll mention that as well. So we lost, Ingram decided they're not going to be part of it. It was just a little too hot for them to handle. And I don't blame them. Ingram has been a fantastic partner of ours since we acquired Digital Book World and brought it to Nashville. I have every confidence they'll eventually come back. But it was a little too hot to the touch for them for whatever reason. Now, the other side of that is we have had an overwhelming amount of however which way people can get to me. I try to make it easy to email me, but I don't like people bothering me on Facebook or something like that. I've had all sorts of incoming messages, and a solid 98% of them have been, this is unbelievable what's happening. I had no idea, and thank you for doing what you did, because otherwise we wouldn't have known. And we're completely supportive. And what's in Digital Book World, with the tagline, the wide world of publishing, we've had a lot of people from different walks of publishing say that they want to get involved with Digital Book World. And the way we found out about you was this band, because I had somebody forward it to me and we talked about it, and we want to be part of this now. And that's getting reflected in the program, even as it gets built out. So, yeah, it is fair to say it has electrified the conference. And that's an interesting word, but because it was already revitalized. We had already brought this thing back, but it's at another level now. And by the time September gets here, it's going to be a very visible event. And we're set for September 14th and 15th in Nashville. Same venue as last year? No, this will be on the campus of Vanderbilt University, and the 16th is a day that's part of Digital Book World as well. But it's some off-site workshops and some optional sort of events that are going on throughout the city. The 14th and 15th are the proper days of the show, and it's on the campus of Vanderbilt University. And we're using that opportunity to sort of spotlight some of the really interesting innovation going on within university presses around the world. And do they have a kind of a conference set up with a nice auditorium and breakout rooms? And yeah, they've got a great facility, and we had to make a couple of modifications. We don't have all the room for all the breakout tracks that we typically will have. So we have 3 breakout tracks to Digital Book World this time: Marketing Book World, Data Book World, and Audio Book World. And alongside sort of the plenary sessions and keynotes, and it'll be about the same size in terms of number of attendees as it was in 2019. So it's going to be good. Digital Book World has turned into, really in our eyes, just looking at the landscape, the only premium sort of publishing learning and networking experience that's out there. There's some other conferences that are on a smaller scale that sort of look at technology in the future and things like that. But the combination of the tech and the learning and the networking and all of this fused across all of these different walks of publishing, Digital Book World, it's taken a step in a very interesting direction. And I tell you, we've been told over and over and over again over the last 18, 24 months or so, last couple of times doing this, Digital Book World makes people's year. It just, the learning and the people you meet, it really sets the pace for the year. And we're honored, that people would think that of us and say it. And so we're, Lynn, we're excited about it. It's full steam ahead.
It seems like I've seen some news accounts that Book Expo America, which is another big book-related conference, is kind of having some troubles, maybe not as successful as it has been in years past. If you were going to give someone an idea of maybe someone who's been to BEA a lot in past years and is thinking about Digital Book World, how would the experience differ, and what might be the advantages of going to Digital Book World compared to BEA?
My perception of Book Expo America is that it's going through a bit of an identity crisis. It's not really that negative of a statement. It's every business and conference, and no matter what it is you're doing, has to be reinvented. It's exactly why we ended up owning Digital Book World. That went through an identity crisis. It got stale, it got broken, and it needed a fresh approach. And that's what it looks like Book Expo America needs. It's really embraced fan culture around reading, and there's nothing wrong with that. It confuses the industry part that wants to come and get things done, and you've got all this fan stuff going on. And it's got this sort of oil and water composition to it. This is my perception now, it's my opinion, for whatever it's worth. Digital Book World makes no bones about what we are. We are straight up B2B. This is an industry conference. And what's super interesting about that is that everybody's a publisher. So an industry conference in a world where everybody's a publisher is actually much more broad of a net than it initially sounds. And, if you're a self-publisher or you're a small publisher, Digital Book World is expensive because it has to be, because there's only so many seats and it's incredibly valuable to attend. But if you can get yourself there and see all these ways you can monetize your work and leverage the content you're creating and meet other people and partners large and small, you'll set yourself apart. And that's what we're trying to cultivate. Book Expo America, they'll find their way. But for now, Digital Book World has it's become something very valuable to the industry.
Can you share any of the keynote speakers or the people that you're most excited that are going to be making presentations at the conference?
Yeah, sure. So the whole conference will start off with a keynote panel from a number of folks across the world working at university presses. So we're going to line them all up and talk through a lot of issues, positive outcomes that have affected that walk of publishing, and then issues and challenges. Our overall keynote is Jennifer Baker. Jennifer Baker is a managing editor at Penguin Random House, and in the children's literature area. But she also is the host of a podcast called Minorities in Publishing, and she's become quite the figurehead for championing diversity and inclusion within this super old guard industry of mainstream publishing. And I find that really fascinating. I actually kind of find it somewhat courageous. And just a super articulate woman that we're proud to have keynote the whole thing. There will be others, some folks that have a little bit some companies that have quite a bit of name recognition that will come on board, none of which I can announce at this point. I'm trying to think. This morning we just announced Vooks, not Books, Vooks,
right?
Which is a very interesting young company that has created sort of the brass ring right now in publishing is who can figure out streaming and subscriptions, because all these people are looking at Spotify, they're looking at Netflix, and they're saying, and they're looking at Apple Music, and they're saying, what about us?
You mean what about books?
What about books? Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm. What about books? And you've got Scribd, who nobody ever talks about,
and Kindle Unlimited.
That are doing interesting work, and they're growing, importantly. But these publishers are just beside themselves thinking about how they can get into this subscription ballgame. And that's what Vooks has done in the realm of educational and children's content. And one of their co-founders will be joining us. But, we got a lot of shoes to drop, and it's going to be a great program.
Now, you're obviously very much a leader in the whole voice movement, This Week in Voice, your podcast and other things. What will be the role of some of the voice technology or developments as they affect the book industry at the conference? Yeah,
it's going to be significant because with the Audio Book World track, the way we've set that up is it's valuable for publishers. It's necessary for publishers to be thinking about audio, not just in, am I going to do an audio book for this title or not? And am I going to have the author, narrator, or somebody else? So we're way past all that. And thinking about how can I make the three-headed monster, that's our term, of podcasts, audiobooks, and voice assistant / smart speakers work to further the efforts and the revenue of modern publishers. And with what we do with voice and conversational AI, there's nobody better positioned to get the people in the room that will give the publishers the information they need on that. And you can definitely expect us to do that.
The other interesting platform that I've been experimenting with are these flash briefings for Alexa, and it's a 5-minute briefing that I put one up every day under a skill named Morning Journal. Are you seeing that as in any way comparable to what podcasting was 10 or 15 years ago as a way for people to connect with millions of listeners through their Alexa devices?
That's exactly what it is. And really, I hadn't thought about it like that until you just said the words. That's exactly what it is. Podcasting 15 years ago, or 20 years ago, I lose track of what year it is, 15 to 20 years ago, like around the start of the new century, people would look at you and say, what's wrong with you?
What's a podcast?
Yeah, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? And stop talking to me about any of that.
Yeah.
And, of course, now you see where we are. Flash briefings are right in that zone of discomfort where the people who are pioneering in that space, and we did an online event last year called Voice of the Flash Briefing, and had a nice turnout for that, but it was just like an online, 4-hour-ish event. And the leaders who are carving out a track record in doing stuff with flash briefings, such as yourself now, the learning that you're gaining by doing that is going to be worth a whole lot 3, 4, 5 years from now. Because right now the problem with flash briefings is it's like the same problem with podcast, except it's magnified. There's discoverability is a problem. There's not a real good mechanism. There's some good mechanisms for podcasts, but there's just such an overwhelming quantity that discoverability remains a problem. Flash briefings, there's not that many, relatively speaking, but there's not nearly as many good channels for discovering them. So it's about the same problem. It's just like scaled down. It's in the same proportion. So that will get solved. There's a lot on the line with that. People have shown, the studies are in, they're conclusive. Flash briefings are a way that people want to consume content. The end. So for the content creators who are doing that and getting their feet wet with it now, a lot of dividends will be paid down the road when Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Apple figure out how they're going to deliver that in a compelling way.
Wow, that's exciting. Well, I'll look forward to cashing in on my pioneer status here at some point.
Hey,
at the least, I might get to be a guest on This Week in Voice.
You should. That's been long overdue. Yeah,
No, I think you're right. I think it has all the same feel of, and I like it because I'm not in it so much for commercial expectations, but just to be able to experiment with what can you do in 5 minutes each morning, and what does it sound like? Does it sound different than a podcast? Or so it's like playing in a game that just hasn't been seen yet, and that's so creative. I love it would be as if you were somewhere and somebody said, hey, I got this idea. Let's have this canvas and let's have all these colored things on brushes and let's see what we can do. It's like you could go anywhere.
It's like the famous phrase or adage, and I'm not going to say it right, but I'll get the point across. All you need to do great things is a great idea and not quite enough time. And the point there is that when human beings are constrained, our creativity shines. And we see it over and over again. And social media is a pretty good example of that, because where did 280 characters come from? Somebody just made that up. But when that is imposed upon us, we think in new ways that we never would have thought about if we had unlimited characters. Same thing for TikTok or Vine or some of these other things that impose these sort of out of left field restrictions. They're freeing.
Yeah.
They're not limiting. They're actually freeing. And when you understand that, you can capitalize. And flash briefings are right there in that same mold of, okay, yeah, we're going to impose upon you these sort of limits of it has to be 3, 5, 7 minutes or whatever. But that's really not a limit at all. It's actually quite freeing, and people will discover that. So, yeah, I'm excited about the format.
I've been speaking with Bradley Metrock, CEO of Score Publishing and Executive Director of Digital Book World. Thanks very much, Bradley.
Lynn, it's always a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining me and for giving me some of your time.
That's it for this week. I'm trying to schedule an interview next week with Stephen Levy, who has a new book out about Facebook, and I've started. It's a terrific book. He spent years having great access to Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook employees past and present, and Stephen said he would like to do it, so he forwarded it to his publicist, and I haven't heard back from them yet, but I'm hopeful that we'll be able to have him on the show next week to talk about that new book, and I'll have a link to the book in the show notes. It is 12 o'clock, and that means there's 2 hours to finish packing up and getting to DIA to head to Boston. And I've got a bit of a cold. I think it's more hay fever than anything else, but every once in a while I found myself sneezing or coughing, and I've been reading that airplane crews and people are on the lookout for anybody that might have flu-like symptoms in case they have the coronavirus. So I'm going to take some antihistamine before I go and hope that I won't be relieved until I'm actually sitting on my seat on that Southwest nonstop flight to Boston, which is due to depart Denver tonight at 5:10 p.m. And so I'll be talking to you next week from Cambridge, Massachusetts, and we'll be in the midst of whatever's happening, and we'll be hopefully in a place where we can go through it with family and everybody who's there with us in the Cambridge and Boston area. Be safe, wash your hands lots, and thanks for listening. This is Len Edgerly for the Kindle Chronicles in downtown Denver. Bye.